So I'm gonna sort of lay the groundwork for the overall the meta of the study, because it is meta, and then I'm going to hand over to Kelly to talk about the devising, because we particularly wanted to. We're excited about the phase 2 of this study. We've worked most closely on that together, or most creatively on that together, and we're having a lot of fun with it. So Cal is going to talk about that, and if there's time, we're going to share with you a little bit of text from that, I think, and then we'll come back to some of the methodological contributions. So this study is kind of the second in 2 ARCs that I've had to study creativity in Australia, and in this case our region, and it's really looking at my formulation of creative ecologies, in this case East Asia and Australia. So as you can see from the slide, it's kind of monumental, and like my DECRA study before this, it's an extremely large data set, over 6 sites, 25 interviews in each site, 150 surveys from each site. And then, you know, as I say, it's sort of the second time that I've done it. And while I've had great mentorship from people like Robin and Michael here in the Create Center and elsewhere around, you know, the fact that we are still needing to really contribute some large data sets around the value of arts education and creative education, creativity. So I see the value in it, but also just as a practitioner, I was sort of really missing and wanting more of that creative engagement as a practitioner. So in some conversations and a reflection, I introduced this phase 2 of the study, and the phase 2 is essentially a 30-minute devised performance, verbatim performance at each of the 6 sites. And then there's also a selfie gallery part of it. But what we're going to share with you tonight is about the performances, and they've been really interesting. They've been really evolving, and Kelly's going to sort of take you through it. So I won't do that, but it's just I think it's been one of the things that people have been most interested in this study, apart from the content, and I think the contribution that it's from our region as well. But people see the performances or hear about how we're making the performances, and they're really interested in the methodology. So if there's anyone here tonight who's interested in how you can do a large scale study and have creative methods incorporated into it, of course, Kathleen Gallagher has been doing that for a long time. But I think it's still a pretty innovative approach to trying to go beyond that standard quant and qual type research design and introduce creative methods. Okay, next slide. We're basing the whole study on a couple of different conceptual frames. So the foundation of it is a text called Asia as Method by Chen, who really has influenced lots of people in education around intercultural and decolonizing methodologies. So one of the things that Chen says is sort of like Southern theory. He kind of worked on the idea that you know, the concept of Asia is a Western colonialist construct, and he encourages us to really try and step out of that, to speak to one another rather than not only be framed by the West, white Western northern states, but to talk to each other about how we can theorize ourselves differently, consider our geopolitical placement differently, and in some sense, and amongst ourselves. So of course, this is kind of challenging for Australia because we still see ourselves, at least, as a white Western nation, sort of plonked in the middle of the Pacific. And so I've been a lover of his text for a long time, and it was taken up by others at Monash, where I used to be, and applied in terms of education and how we might better educate from a perspective of being in the Asia Pacific. So one of the things that I'm doing in the study is using Asia's method in creative education. What might that look like if we started to really think more about each other in this region culturally and creatively, not just economically? And also I'm borrowing from non-representational theory. Nigel Thrift is kind of the father of that, I suppose. And Philip Vanini's work is awesome on that as well. And non-representational theory really applying to most directly to phase 2. So Kel will cover that. And my theorization of creative ecologies, I sort of adapted from Landry and John Howkins, Charles Landry and John Howkins, both of whom are sort of like urban planning economics. Landry is economics. And one of the reasons why is because I really resisted, like in part of my previous study, I did a huge survey of the measurement tools for creativity, the traditional ones, from kind of Guilford to, to the present. And there's some collaborators in the States I still work with who use those kinds of models and cognitive and developmental individual measures. And certainly the incoming PISA tests on creativity and other kinds of global standardized measures, including national curricula items like ours, are individual measures. But at the same time, I have argued in my first study in my DECRA, and I still argue that that's an insufficient way to enhance or foster kind of creative environment in which we all would benefit from. And I guess that sort of aligns more with in our neck of the woods. It sort of aligns more with Teresa Mabile, her kind of thinking and teaching about it, and Tina Seelig. And of course, they've taken, even though they're psychology folks, they've taken that into organizational change. And I strongly feel that schools will benefit from an ecological approach. And there's some collaborators of mine in Canada now and in Finland who are starting to take up this model of mine, and it's fun. So that's some of what we're working with here. I think that might be it for me. Is that it, Cal? Oh, here's a quote from Landry. So again, starting back in my last study, I started thinking, as an arts educator, I started thinking, what might happen if we can sort of take off that hat for a minute of approaching things the way I had as an arts educator and as a playwright, and think about it as like schools as workplaces, And I think there's a lot of arguments to be made for and against that approach. It's quite a neoliberal approach in some respects, but it also acknowledges that we're all working together in an ecology and we're interdependent as well. And I think schools are persistently choosing to reject that view. And I guess with all the cuts that we have now in teacher education and the arts and higher education in this country, it'll be very interesting to see where that sort of goes. Okay, Cal, I'll hand over, I think.
Okay, so I get to talk about this phase 2 performance aspect, which has been, it's a joy to work on. In fact, we're right in the middle of developing the Melbourne performance right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But this is where we return to the site where we collected the initial data from phase 1, so the 25 interviews and surveys, etc. And we devise a 30-minute snapshot performance of the data with local actors, which is then presented to interview participants and other interested parties. And there's a post-performance discussion that follows, which is always incredibly rich and interesting. We frame, as Anne said, we frame this work through the lens of non-representational theory. As Lorimer puts it, non-representational theory is an umbrella term for diverse work that seeks to better cope with our self-evidently more than human, more than textual, multi-sensual worlds. Or as Thrift puts it, Non-Representational Theory's 7 tenets, are meant to sensitize social scientists to the fact that they are there to hear the world and make sure that it can speak back, just as much as they are there to produce wild ideas, to render the world problematic by elaborating questions, and to open research and theorizing to more action, more imagination, more light, more fun even. And yeah, fun has definitely been a component of it so far. So we return to each of the sites, as I said, for the phase 2 performance, and it involves engaging with local actors in a collaboration loop to performatively present a sample of phase 1 interview data. It's an informal process of iteratively sharing the data rather than seeking any sort of conclusive rendering of findings. Doing so allows for creative multimodal collaboration through which to share and reflect on the emergent themes, identify resonances and differences between sites, and engage the diverse cultural knowledges so richly present and which so deeply inform the different creativities at each of the 6 sites. Through this multi-sided ethnography, we extend Apogei's articulation of a social imaginary that flows via ethnoscapes, the global cultural flows that typify contemporary creative and educative work and subjects. By recognising both the global mobilities as well as the unique local experiences of today's global citizenship and creative practice, we together explore a creative imaginary made up of interview transcripts, inter and transcultural bodies, national borders, similar and different approaches to studio and creative practice, and of course our own subjectivities. The devising studio sessions include a range of approaches, including, which I'll get into more shortly, site-specific brainstorming with actors, improvisation, soundscaping, blocking, and script development. In addition to the rich analytical value for us as researchers, the goal of the 3 to 4 day process is to create 30 minutes of performance work to share with an invited audience of study participants, guests, and the public. We undertake this work informed by the view that culture is never a finished product, but is a growing, changing organism. Therefore, culture is in constant creation, definition, and reflection of itself. As such, rather than seeking to represent creativity at one of the particular sites in one 30-minute performance, we work towards a theatrical snapshot of the data that serves as an iterative intercultural performance for deepening the inquiry. In sharing this performative draft of multiple voices, the primary purpose is to raise questions and provoke further discussion about creativity in situ, adding an affective dimension to the mixed methods data. This performative approach to undertaking situated creativity research resists positivist goals of representing or generalising about this culture or these practices. Rather, it seeks to extend the creativity conversation beyond the study limits and into the public domain, and highlight the investigation as relational, evolving, and open-ended. As I said, at each site, we seek out local actors with whom to collaborate. These are some of our, these are our Sydney performers, our Sydney cast. Requirements are for actors with training and skills to work quickly. The artistry of an actor to express themselves vocally, physically, symbolically, and metaphorically. To link the intellectual with the physical and the expressive. And it's really important that the actors have first-hand experience as locals that can anchor the performance in time and place in a way that we, as foreigners in all sites other than Melbourne, could not achieve alone. They provide insights that we might otherwise overlook. That lived experience of local sites, sounds, customs, speech, and cultural knowledge helps us paint a sensory portrait of the site that enriches the interview data. By working with the actors in a collaborative manner, we thread the lived experience of creative professionals, creative practice, actors' skills, physical and narrative performance techniques, providing, as Canadian playwright Sharon Pollock says, the opportunity to light up, if not the whole diamond, a larger portion of it than possible with a single writer. Converting a site snapshot into a performable script involves searching for performative qualities in addition to resonant quotes, common themes, and rich site-specific resonances. Like many verbatim playwrights, Anne analyses the 25 interviews at each site for both thematic emergence and dramatic potential. She then converts this site snapshot into a performable script, and it involves searching for qualities such as salient quotes, common themes, rich site-specific resonances. Whilst Anne is highly experienced with this process and with staging the resultant play scripts and performances, these are usually from more emotional, affective topics in ethnographic studies, including, for example, refugee experiences, the stories of LGBTIQ+ teachers, lived experiences of adoptees and other vulnerable populations. Dramatising data about creativity, especially in a culturally different context, poses additional challenges. Verbatim's a form of documentary play that, as many of you know, that typically uses interview transcripts, articles, and other primary and secondary source material as the content informing the work. Depending on country, discipline, and time, these works are commonly known as documentary theatre, ethnodrama, tribunal plays, research-informed theatre, and other such terms. Unlike in this study, verbatim theatre is a form most often used for political or highly controversial and emotional events, which lend historical and factual drama to the text-heavy form. Using verbatim as a form for a topic like creativity presents interesting challenges and tensions in relation to research and performance. For example, what should be the organising principle? Colourful characters? Crafting an overarching narrative about a creative city that may or may not make claims to representation and truth? Should it be compelling stories, controversial themes, or vivid imagery? It's hard to know. Some sites offer more emotional interviews, such as in Hong Kong in March of last year, with the approaching protests against mainland China's influence in local life. Some other sites offer a predominance of statistical information, economic commentary, or individualised account that don't really reflect on the national, regional, and/or international focus of this study in particular. Perhaps the most challenging, some of the best data in terms of the study's focus, was the least dramatic for translation onto stage. There are lessons here for how to conduct multimodal and intercultural studio work, which has a range of, at times, diverse outcomes. It's important to remember that we need to honour the art form in which we're working as well. So, for example, if it was film audiences have some basic formal expectations, and the same is true for theatre, visual art, dance. We respect the form in which we're working, and we want that to be apparent to audiences. So these are some of the tensions that we're constantly trying to find a sweet spot with, I guess, when we come to presenting to an audience. A fundamental aspect of each script that Anne writes is character, of course. Each character is a composite of multiple participants' voices and represents the three categories that the interviewees work in. So that's higher ed, creative and cultural industries, and the arts. The characters and their words are curated so as to address various perspectives and points that arise in the interviews. We've got a couple of characters from Hong Kong to read for you, some introductions just to, I guess, demonstrate a couple of the characters and some of the themes that they touch on. So this is an opera singer from Hong Kong. I'm female, 23 years old, and I was born in Hong Kong. I learned Cantonese opera and hopefully it will be my career. I went to the Hong Kong Chinese Association. They have an academy of opera. We went to the school on Saturday every week from 11 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock p.m. It's kind of like an extracurricular activity. It's not the regular training like in mainland China. They have regular schools and whole day training. But in Hong Kong, we don't have that. So I have 4 years training in the academy. And after graduating for that, I went to the Yau Ma Tei Theatre Venue Partnership Scheme. I'll still be in the scheme until like forever, maybe. We don't really belong to certain troupes. When we have a show, they'll contact you if they think you're suitable. For girls, for female roles, it's kind of competitive because there are many plays that have acting female roles. I don't think I will be as competitive as my teachers were because they were trained from when they were 4 or 8 or 6, maybe. But for us, I went to the academy when I was 16. It was very late. Our veterans are the old teachers, but the audience is changing. You need to try more new blood in the audience, or maybe like students. So we need to rejuvenate some new plays as well. Our audience base is pretty old.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn. We've got the corporate. This is enter corporate manager.
Boo hiss. Everyone can boo hiss in their own environment. Okay. Sorry, just getting it situated. So I've been in Hong Kong for 6 years, and I'm the managing director of sales and operations here. It's difficult to find people qualified to do the kinds of roles that we have here because there's an intersection between technology and creativity that isn't trained for currently. So it's technology, it's data, and then actually understanding creative process. A lot of the graduates, particularly if they've come from a business discipline, don't understand creative process. The practical arts application, but also the creative thinking application isn't always there. The resilience and failure tolerance is 0 when they hit us. They're so used to succeeding, you know, they're attached to it. We interview around 4 key criteria, and it's well documented about how we hire. We look for team playing and saying we more than I, a generally good, caring collaborator, community-minded. We look for general cognitive ability. Well, yeah, you've got to be smart and can think creatively about problem solving. Then the last one is we look for leadership capabilities. So evidence that you can start a movement and people will follow you. We advertise just about every role globally. So I think we have around 10,000 jobs a year that are vacant, 2 million applications per year. Then we actually have algorithms that check the applicants first because it's so scale, and then streamline them based on the criteria that we're looking for. The previous team that I had, 2 of the girls were graduates from Taiwan in design thinking. That was their thing. They'd actually written their own book in Chinese, which sold out of its first edition, 10,000 copies, and they were in the second print run at 23 or 24 years old. Yeah, we hire overachievers. So we set up our environment to try and encourage collaboration and creativity because we know that's where the good ideas are going to come from. We understand that we need to create the culture that we want to have. Where we have intersections, things like design thinking seem to fit into both camps because if it goes too far to one end of the creativity spectrum, it kind of gets too far away from the technologists and the language that we use in our business. But there are the other forms of creativity, and within team building events, they do everything from cooking classes, learning how to paint signs together. We used to have a budget for ski trips, right? Well, they stopped that one. It's too dangerous, but. Oh, but in 2.5 weeks, I'm flying to Israel and Palestine to do leadership in conflict training. If I think about the definition of creativity from an agency or an arts perspective, well, we're probably not at that end of the spectrum. If I think about creativity as more of innovation related to getting things done, production and engineering, we're very much at that end.
So as you can see, we've got interesting characters that are juxtaposed with one another and have different, very, very different views from their different perspectives. And as you can probably also tell from that, it gets pretty wordy. So in order to avoid becoming just a bunch of talking heads regurgitating data, we have to think a little bit differently when it comes to staging. So once this provisional script that Anne creates is on the table, it's still open for development in the collaborative studio process with the actors. The week of devising becomes a time for discussing the actors' impressions of the portraits created in the script, of adding additional personal narratives from the perspective of locals. And it allows us to work with the actors to create devised sound and bodyscapes that bring the words to life, as well as give the audience a break from all the words, so that the meaning can sink in a little bit more. We begin the first day of co-devising by giving the actors prompts for generating improvisations informed by sights and sounds of the site. Doing so is both a well-established devising technique, but it also establishes that really important culture of collaboration within the studio. We ask the actors to populate a whiteboard with sights and sounds of their home city, as you can see our Singapore cast doing in the photo there. The free association brainstorming is an effective first step in drawing on the actors' cultural knowledge, as well as encouraging them to work together to build a collective image of Singapore. Next, each actor is asked to select a couple of sights or sounds to embody and incorporate into a moving soundscape. One actor begins on stage, repeating a sound and physical movement that expresses their selection, and then gradually the other actors enter the space and bringing it to life. We do this a second time, this time asking the actors to consider sights and sounds of creativity in their home site. In specifying this focus to the prompt, the actors are encouraged to consider the specific forms and outputs of creativity, rather than just iconic but sometimes generic aspects of the city. As in Brainstorm 1, they are instructed to select a couple of sights and sounds to layer into a moving soundscape of creativity in their home. Some of these improvised moments are incorporated into the final performance, serving to extend the verbatim script in multiple ways. The vignettes anchor the performance in physical and multi-sensory aspects of the time and place in which the data is collected. It aids in providing context for the voices and characters in the script. Using the physical skills of the actors in this way honours the art form of verbatim theatre, which relies on the visual, oral, symbolic and bodily elements of theatre as much as it does the words of the participants. In privileging these other performance modes, we highlight the body as a site of knowing, in which, as performance ethnographer Dee Soini Madison argues, through the intersection of bodies in motion in the space, meanings and experiences in the field are filtered and coloured through sensations of the body, that is, through body knowledge. If we accept that knowledge has infinite origins and forms, we're able to accept knowledge from and of the body. Over the roughly 3 days of devising, performative opportunities arise from the improvised work, script, and performers themselves. These opportunities are pursued and explored until a cohesive performance is achieved, one that is then refined as a rehearsed reading for an audience of interview participants and other interested parties. At these performance events, Anne provides an introduction to the overall study, just as she did earlier, as well as frames the purpose of the snapshot performance. An invitation is extended to the audience to engage in a discussion about the topic, the power of performance in research contexts, and an exploration of the site-specific creativity from the snapshot performance. This audience engagement is a fundamental part of the data engagement, ensuring that it is a dialogic performance, the kind of performance that resists conclusions, intensely committed to keeping the dialogue between performer, text, and audience going. That's a Conceptual quote, that's not me, they're not my words. Anne, did you want to speak to these methodological contributions?
Sure. So thanks for that, Cal. And I just want to say it's just been such a joy and privilege to work with Cal on this devising. It's really been very and sometimes very familiar, not just culturally, in all sorts of places. And you know, we've been very fortunate to be invited into universities, but also theaters and other amazing public and private places in order to do this work. And yeah, it's just been really fun, Kel. So thanks. Just want to publicly acknowledge that, and your expertise has just been great to watch. And I think too that like every time we've done it, it's kind of evolved. And we'll just quickly finish up by telling you about the Melbourne one. But just to close out this, as I said, people's interest has been very focused on the methodology of using something like this, the devising component, with a large-scale study. So there's that. There's the affective. So I have a PhD student called Julia Vaugh, who's also brilliant, and she's a part of this project. And she's working on specifically on the devising component. And she's theorizing that around affect and empathy in creative collaboration. So this attention to affect has been really fun and exciting as well. So we're looking not only at Kel's and my process together, the actors' process in a improvisational and creative development process, right? And then also ours with them. So that's a privilege to have her doing that very careful work as part of this project. And then the other stuff about yeah, I think that it's been a little bit, it's the trickiest part, and Kel talked about this in terms of tensions, is sharing this kind of work and not having people go, well, that doesn't seem like New York City to me. I've lived here for 30 years and that's not New York, you know. But I sort of think about it like, you know, like in the other kind of verbatim work that I've been involved in, like if we present a play with like 5 LGBT teacher characters, I don't think anyone thinks that we're trying to represent the entire world population of LGBT teachers, right? They just you're having an emotional, affective experience. I think one of the tensions here, as Cal again noted, is that, and we've been playing with, and there's been some cool stuff happening in this Melbourne one, but you know, it's not inherently dramatic. It's not inherently tense. It's not inherently cathartic. You know, I mean, people get excited about their practice, but when you talk about creativity, it's a conceptual, right? For most of us, and people who are coming at it from the artist point of view, you know, we would, I'd probably be more passionate when I'm talking about being a playwright than if I talk about creativity. That's sort of the abstraction of the practice. So it's been challenging dramatically. It's been challenging how people respond to it in terms of like, it should have ethnographic truth claims. And we're like, no, it's a snapshot. It's an engagement. It's an iteration, you know. That's been interesting and challenging. And that's where we draw on the non-representational theory and what other work can research do if it's not kind of making summative statements or representational claims about what it's, you know, engaging with and who it's engaging with. But I guess the other thing is, this, I think one of the things that's been, this isn't methodological, but just one of the adjacent issues that's been kind of tricky is that especially, is that because our research sites are cities, and we go and we ask them, there's a level to the interview questions, which is local, you know, city, state, country, and then our region, right? And so when we would say to them, what is a kind of Melbourne creativity, for example, they'd say, well, there's no Melbourne creativity. We just do creativity like everyone does it, you know. And I would say, well, dig deeper, you know, because on one level, yes, but this is part, in my opinion, this is part of the emaciation of this creativity discourse that's happening right now. Everyone's talking about it, but it's a little bit hollow in some respects, isn't it? It's like, and so there's the part, it's not an accident. That's not an accident. It's part of the universalization of the discourse. So everyone's creative. We're trying to find the ways in which everyone is creative, and it's got this kind of generic quality to it now, right? So when you say to somebody, well, what kind of creativity did you do, or how is creativity in Melbourne different than Sydney? They go, well, no, we just do it. We do what everyone else is doing, and then I would say, well, think about Hollywood films versus French films, right? There are exceptions, but you can say something about those two things, and they're culturally infused. They're differently culturally infused, and therefore they have different kinds of aesthetics in general terms, and they have different kinds of structures sometimes. And so this is what I've been trying to explore, but at times it can be very challenging. Same way like 10 years ago, you go into schools, as Marianne Hunter has written about, and you go into schools and say, talk about creativity, and teachers would just say, I'm not creative. They couldn't talk about it. But now they can, because it's more popular. Anyway, all right, that was a tangent, sorry. Okay, the next slide, which is it? That we're going to invite you to, oh wow, that's really small. So we've had this amazing experience. Kel, do you want to, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but we're doing the Melbourne Devising online, and it's the first one that we've done online, and we've had 2 goes at it, and next Friday we're having the performance. We're sharing the performance of it, and it's just been fascinating, exciting, because I think there's been constraints of not being able to devise, and some of you might be involved right now in creative development from remote locations, but because here in Melbourne we still can't gather, we've done it online, and Cal used Padlet to do the brainstorming instead of whiteboards in the same room, and it's been amazing and cool, and just people, all of us being arranged in boxes and being in art, like it's just presented all these other kind of I think improvisational and staging almost opportunities that weren't there in a traditional sense. Kel, did you want to just say a few words about that or no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, to the point that I made earlier about working with experienced actors, that's kind of really fundamental part of this process, working with brave actors who can essentially work in their own space to generate evoke a sense of Melbourne through this little box. And it's amazing what they've been able to come up with, and what we've been able to generate. And I think, I presume many people in this Zoom room right now have had to get used to delivering through this screen here. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about how at first you think there's just going to be so many things you can't do, but actually the more you do it, the more potential you realize there is to work with this. And I think that's what we've found and are continuing to find. And so, yeah, it's a hell of an experiment. We're looking forward to, presenting it next week and seeing how people engage with it.
Yeah, come join us if you can. I think that's it.
That's it.
Is that it? Thank you. John's got a question up there. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kel.
So interesting. Thank you.
Hi, Leon. Hi, Ali. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Can see you now. I couldn't see you before.
Lots of friendly faces.
Yes.
Yeah.
So John's got a question there, Anne and Kelly. Well, it's 2 parts. First of all, what surprised you the most during this research? And then what do you think or hope might change as a result of the research?
So, Cal, I was wondering if we could jump to the second one, and you could talk about the think impact evaluation if you felt like it.
Oh, yeah.
I can, but you're better at that.
Oh, really? Okay. Let's give it. Um,
What a lame handover.
yeah, well done. Thanks. Yeah, have that one. No, we've engaged an organisation to work with us to identify what some of the impacts are, for want of a better term, of this particular study, what the contributions are to, we know what the theoretical, well, we have ideas about what some of the theoretical contributions will be, but, this is an ARC funded future fellowship study. So there's got to be some impacts and some outputs, and getting some external assistance with kind of drilling down into that sort of stuff has been really, really interesting and really, really helpful. I think when we initially started, we thought that the impacts that they would come up with would have more to do with the interview data. And they kept coming back to this phase 2. They kept coming back to this performance, and they couldn't quite get their heads around it. But I think we, at the start, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we were just like, no, don't worry about that. You guys just focus on this bit. Just focus on the more traditional data. But they kept coming back to it, and that has made us really drill down into what the potential of the phase 2 in conjunction with the phase 1 data might be. Don't ask us to tell you what that is. We're still kind of on the way to really, really working through that. And did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of you here and I have had those conversations about the need for big data sets, and there's still a need for that, right? There's still a need for that kind of work. And at the same time, I think all of us, I think all of us here understand the kind of impact when we're talking about universities now being required to evidence impact, right? I think that we understand the interpersonal impact of the arts, of collaboration, of whatever, co-creation. And it was really interesting to get kind of an external evaluator to come in and have them say that this is the most immediate impact. So they look at short-term, middle-term, and long-term impact. And of course, long-term impact won't always, in both of my large studies, policy change, is what we're after. But that, as many of you here know, that takes forever and sort of can go back and forth, and it's hard to make change in that arena. I guess for me, one of the things that it's got a trade and economic side to this, or a cultural studies side to this study that my first one did not. It was purely educational. And I think, what surprised me, or what I'd like to come up, I guess, is for people to start thinking more in education, to go back to thinking about the creative relational, using Masumi's term and Jonathan Wyatt. I think I've always felt like, our individual pieces of work aren't going to change the world, but relationships will. And that was right from my PhD, working with South Sudanese young women. And it's like, well, does anyone give a crap about a PhD that makes claims about their terrible racist secondary school experiences? Will they change policy because of those testimonies? Maybe, probably not, right? Was my cynical premise. But sitting together and collaborating, making a film together and getting to know each other and having that be two-way research rather than monodirectional, I do think can make a difference. It makes a difference to me, and it makes a difference to them, and it establishes relationships that can then expand into other areas. And I think one of the things that has come out, and maybe this is a surprise, John, I don't know, but it shouldn't have been, but it does sort of feel like it. One of the things that come out is people, even non-white people in Australia who we've interviewed, talking about the kind of parasitic relationship we have with the Asia Pacific or East Asia, right? If we're engaging at all, it's sort of like we're engaging in a way that's pretty monodirectional. We're going to go train them to do something, or we want that market for us to export our things, or we want their students, or whatever. But in terms of having a real kind of ongoing relationship that goes both ways and talks about how what we're doing here in Australia and in our with our neighbors in our region is potentially, and I don't know the answer to this part, is potentially different. And we all have to stand shoulder to shoulder looking back toward the UK and the US incessantly, asking for those experts to come here and tell us how to do things. And I say that as an American, but it's tiresome. It's really tiresome. And if you believe the longstanding research, now over 80 years of research, admittedly not a huge body of literature, but it's old, that talks about the culturally constituted nature of creativity, then we would be really stupid to continue to keep trying to replicate North American ideas of creativity. It's annoying to me as a North American. So I just think I don't know who would take it up, because it does really fit in between economic policy, cultural studies, and potentially education. But I'm gonna, as we say back home, I'm gonna keep hoeing that row until somebody takes notice, because I think it is true what Kel said, that to have an external evaluator come in for, tens of thousands of dollars, many tens of thousands of dollars, to do an evaluation, and they did not want to look at over 700 surveys. I mean, they did look at them, but they're thinking, where's the impact here? Well, higher education is probably changing already anyway, largely dictated not only by cuts now, evisceration, but also by industry, micro-credentialing, all the things we know. Secondary education, once again, misses an opportunity to be more expansive and holistic, and is only, reifying the standardized individualist measures. So where will culture change come from? Perhaps it goes back to that original utopian view I had, which is relationships. At some point, maybe we've all had enough of the North American ed psych view of creativity, and we can talk about a different way. And I just think there are particular ways in which the creativity is being done here, and the markets, and that go beyond sort of, indigenous is our calling card, or, craft, stuff like that. So I think anyway, obviously I'm passionate about it, but I think that there's lots of regional cooperation we can do here that's not being done. Thanks, Zoe.
John, did you want to come back with anything there?
Come back at me, John. Come back at me.
No, I think that's really interesting. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Callie. That was really interesting. And I think that I think that really the work that you've done and led, and particularly has changed the way that our field really presents research back to communities. And I think I saw the Sydney showing, and that discussion was fascinating, that followed that. And I think it does have, as echoing exactly what you said, I think, it's great to see big data, and it's great to see the survey data and analyze that, and that's really interesting. But I think, what really speaks and resonates, I think, is the humanness of the work that you do. And I think that was what really struck, I think, a lot of us who were there in Sydney. And I imagine at all of the other sites as well, and probably next week as well in Melbourne. But that it really spoke to us, I think. And the discussion that followed, I think, was really interesting too, and comparing, I think you'd just been to Brisbane a couple of weeks beforehand, and sort of talking about the differences between those two, between the Brisbane and Sydney sites, and having a few of us in the room who had lived in both of those places, including some of the artists that you were working with in Sydney. And I think that was really interesting. That is the only thing that I'm fascinated by is how I almost want to see all of the different versions, so that you can go, what are the differences and what are the commonalities between them. I mean, you sort of talk about them as they were there, but I think that was really interesting.
Well, I think it's, the opportunities opened up by, this year and this technology and all of that sort of stuff, that makes that dream of what we have previously referred to as the ring cycle a little bit more realistic and achievable, and we've felt that way right the way along, that it would be fantastic to see these performances side by side, be fascinating for different audiences as well, I think.
Well, yeah, and also just playing back to each other. Like, I mean, there's some beautiful digital media research where, it's really focused on getting the researcher out of the picture completely. And I love that notion. And it's sort of like in the beginning, 10 years ago, it's like, oh, how can you do that? You can't really do that. Then what's our role and all that kind of stuff? It's sort of like the teacher question, right? And but once we started doing the online Melbourne devising, it was like, oh, we could actually just set up this thing and we wouldn't have to, like, I was doing the calculations for the airfares alone. I was like, oh my God, it's going to cost like, $50,000 or $100,000 or something to bring everyone together in one place. All these casts, these multicultural casts, but we could literally do it online. And while you missed some affective resonances and power being in the same room together, it's probably not realistic to have done it the original kind of way. But the idea to bring all 6 casts together, perform to each other, and then and those participants and actors, have a conversation about, well, there are actually some similarities across our regions, and sure, it's curated in a particular way, but we can see some differences and some similarities, and this is really different than American or New York or London or whatever kind of thing. So I think that would be amazing. I'm really, really pushing to do that for next year. But Kel's got to have this baby first and hand it over to someone so she can come back.
So you think this might happen next year?
Definitely going to happen next year.
Well, I think that will be really fabulous because, I mean, I was going to ask you about, did you record the different conversations in the different contexts? And is there a way then of overlaying some of the conversation with these performances?
That's interesting. I don't think that's not something we've discussed or really thought about, but
no, but we have that. We have it.
We do have it.
We could do that.
Yeah.
But that I just found, like John, that the Sydney conversation was so interesting. And I'd love to hear the other conversations as well. And so I just wonder if there's a way of putting those things, both the devised performances and the conversations beside each other.
That's amazing.
I think then there'll be a meta conversation out of that. Even
because that's the kind of democratized analysis, isn't it, in a certain way?
Yeah.
That's fun.
Taking your point, about the nuanced differences, between every different context, but also thinking about then, is there a way of bringing those together in some kind? It's like a kaleidoscope or a mosaic. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I think it would be so beautiful, and a lot of the participants have remained involved and remained interested. And even for this evaluation, the evaluators have gone back and talked to interviewees and things. So it feels possible and dynamic and ongoing. But I love your suggestion, Robin. We'll do it. Everything's possible.
Yeah, and I think that's to Anne's credit about, thinking up this, imagining this phase 2 engagement, is that now that it blows open the possibilities for engaging with this data, for working with this data. The longer we can kind of resist the need to jump to findings, and we can keep asking questions and keep interrogating and looking at things from different perspectives. I think that's the great opportunity that we've been given by Anne's instinct to inject some creativity back into a previously very uncreative study about creativity.
But also, like, I think that there are some things, yeah, you're right, totally right. Take that, mic drop. I think that there's some interesting thinking and writing maybe to be done too in terms of research methodologies about how these are complementary and not you know, different or negating of the other. Like, it's so cool, like Robin, with what you're talking about. Like, imagine if you had that whole version of the phase 2 data, and then somehow on top of that, you've got, like, out of 700 surveys, this is what the students in higher education right now said about their training and creativity, or, you know, out of 150 hour-long interviews, this is, you know, like, they're just different nuances and they speak to each other. And I love that. I love that additional, like, the larger kaleidoscope of that. I think it's a great way to make an argument for arts-based research, that the way that it enhances the quant and qual research.
Yep. And also the way that it can reach, as you said, much broader communities and audiences, you know, in a way that so much research traditionally never does, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's really one of the huge, you know, benefits of arts-based and arts-informed research. But sadly, we've run out of time, and there's been lots of comments along the way about what an interesting session this has been and how much people are looking forward to the next phase, etc. So thank you so much, both of you, for a
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
We'll look forward to the next installment.
Yes, and thanks to all of you for coming along and spending your time with us this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Richly rewarding. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much. Fabulous.
Good night.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. Take care.